Hey everybody, this is Modern Refugee, having my coffee this morning. And I wanted to share with you guys a story of one of the old timers that I heard a lot of stories about growing up. Now, I've shared different stories with you guys about different old timers that I either knew or that I heard stories of that were gone before I was born. This particular individual, he was gone before I was born, but heard a lot about him when I was a kid growing up. You know, the Alleys and the Bicycle Johns and those guys, and that's where this particular fella falls in there. And his name was Solly, and I heard a lot of stories of old Solly when I was a kid growing up. And Solly was born to older parents, and unfortunately, his parents passed away when he was in his 20s. And they left him a little house, and he had a little place of his own, and he raised chickens, and he gardened, and did a lot of the stuff that the old timers did. And he lived into his early 60s, and then he passed away. Now, that doesn't sound like that interesting a story, right? But here's the kicker on that. Solly had Down syndrome. So Solly was physically handicapped for that length of time, yet he's still what we would call today prepped. I mean, what they called it back then, that was just, how they lived. But it's what we would call today, prepping and homesteading. So he had the neighbors would check in on him, my grandparents included. They would check on him from time to time. He couldn't really drive, so if he had to go any long distance, the neighbors would have to take him different places, which they did. I was told he did have a bicycle, so he could, get to town and get a few things if he needed to, sort of independently. But if he had to go like to the doctor in the city or something like that, somebody would have to take him, which they did. And I think there's a lot to be learned from this particular story. One is the old-fashioned, neighborly help that we don't see much of anymore. I mean, it still exists out there, but not like it did back 70, years ago. People depended on their neighbors back then. They don't depend on their neighbors now like they used to, and there's a lot of animosity in between neighbors that you don't have nowadays. But back then, people helped their neighbors out. And the other thing is, people nowadays like to complain about everything. And I think that's been a general thing in the last 20 years especially. People just complain more and more and more about stuff. And yeah, a lot of us are in shitty situations, and that's the way it is. But whenever I get into a really kind of crappy situation, I try to think back to other people that were in crappy situations and how they got through it. And Solly is a perfect example. How much of a crappy situation can that be? You're physically handicapped like that, and your parents die, and you're more or less orphaned, and you got to kind of figure it out for yourself. That's a pretty crappy situation. But he made it work, and he did the best he could with what he had to work with, and sometimes that's all you can do. But the old timers, they were tough no matter what the situation is. And I think that toughness still lies in people today. It's just been buried by the convenience and the technology that's available to us. But I'd like to see that toughness and that resiliency that was in the old timers kind of sprout and take root today in more modern people. And that's why I wanted to share that story, that no matter how bad things are, there's always a way to get through things. And the old timers, I look to them for guidance in that, whether it's face to face. Of course, there's less of them now than there was when I was a kid growing up, but either face to face, but through their stories and through their experiences. And that's why I'm sharing this with you guys here today. But anyway, I appreciate all my subscribers out there. Hope you guys got a little information and a little entertainment out of this video. As always, just sharing another one of the stories here of the old timers with you guys. You guys have a good one.